Get your gear ready. This is a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation. Welcome to A Sherpa's Guide to Innovation, a podcast dedicated to guiding you along your innovation expedition. This is your host, Ben Tingey. I'm thrilled to welcome our Sherpa star, Dr. Jean Wright, Chief Innovation Officer at Carolina's Healthcare System, in her inaugural podcast, hopefully the first of many. Welcome, Dr. Wright.
Well, thank you so much. I've been wanting to have this opportunity so I could say, hey, Ben.
Hey, Jean.
I love that enthusiastic opening that you all have at the beginning of each of these podcasts.
Well, we really are excited to be doing this podcast, and so we're glad that enthusiasm comes across. Well, on our previous episode, Jay and I reviewed our experience and the things that we learned from attending the Mayo Clinic Transform Conference. Our team attends several conferences each year, and we plan on providing similar reviews of those conferences on our podcast, typically a few weeks after the conference concludes, and so stay tuned for more. And today is one of those podcasts. I'll have the pleasure of asking Dr. Wright about her experiences attending the Innovation Learning Network Conference held last week, October 17th through the 19th in the Netherlands. Now, I'm fluent in Spanish, but Dutch isn't Spanish.
It's a long way from that.
It's very different. So how do you pronounce the name of the city where the conference was held?
The name of the town is Nijmegen. And you got to get a little rasp to your Nijmegen, right?
Wonderful.
Something like that. Yeah.
Sounds like a great place.
It was.
Wonderful. Well, before we begin, I wanted to remind our listeners that you can engage with us on Twitter using the hashtag Innovation Engine. That's our team name at Carolina's Healthcare System. We'd love to hear your feedback about the podcast. And please also feel free to send us questions or topics that you'd like us to discuss or address in future podcasts. So to kick off our conversation with Dr. Wright about the Innovation Learning Network Conference, first of all, what did you think of the Netherlands? Was this the first time that you visited?
No, I had been there once before, a long time ago, but the weather was picture perfect. I felt like I was traveling through a calendar the entire time I was there. And yes, I did see tulips, although they were in a store and not in a field. And I did see a windmill and had to take a prerequisite selfie with a windmill in the background. So it was great.
Sounds like it was idyllic.
It was.
Terrific.
It was.
All right. Well, could you take a minute to tell us a little bit about the Innovation Learning Network organization? Who are they? What do they do?
The Innovation Learning Network is an organization made up of members of healthcare systems and healthcare-related companies who get together a couple of times a year for an in-person gathering or an in-person meeting. It's not just a conference. It's never death by PowerPoint. It's always a very interactive experience. In fact, when I first started the Innovation Engine over 5 years ago, I think the first check we cut was to the ILN, the abbreviated name. We saw that partnering with other organizations that were on this same journey would be the quickest way for us to learn. And I know, Ben, you hear from me a lot of times say, be first, be fast, and skip unnecessary steps. Well, we find by walking alongside the members of the ILN, we can do just that. They're a great group of folks. They're in the trenches innovating just like we are. They're struggling with how do we fund our project? How do we find the right startup company to partner with? What if we're working with a big company and they want to take our intellectual property? Or where's the world of sensors and personalized medicine going? They are struggling with the exact same topics we are. And every time I say I not only learn from the opening speakers that are there, but I really learn from the people that attend the meeting. And frankly, they become some of our best friends and frankly, some of our best partners. We partner with some of these organizations to do even some of our own innovations at Carolinas.
Sounds like a wonderful experience. And as you said, this isn't a typical conference, Death by PowerPoint. We'd expect no less from a group of innovators, right?
Exactly. And in fact, I think that's one of the things I like about it is they practice what they preach. And every single meeting, we do something so you walk away with the skill. For example, this meeting was held in the open space or unconference format. It's the second time I've been to one that's built around this. And I must say, the very first time I came from out of my previous role of chief medical officer and pretty structured job into this group where I thought, wow, you're going to have to medicate me to get me to really perform in this group. But the people who come together set the agenda after they get there. So there's nothing that you can look at ahead of time. So that means the agenda is going to be fluid, and it's going to be based on the people who come and what's on their mind. And so one of the first things we do at a meeting like that is there's an open mic, and you step up to the mic and you say, I'm interested in teen behavioral health issues. And somebody else might step up and say, I'm interested in virtual ICUs. Someone at this meeting stood up and said, let's cheat death. I'm interested in personalized medicine and telomere lengthening and shortening. How can we maximize people's life and their quality of life? So everyone that's interested or has a topic steps up to the mic. We then put it on a big Post-it, stick it on the wall, make a calendar out of it, and the next 2 or 3 days are played out by people self-sorting which room you go to based on the topic that you like.
Yeah.
Right. Have you ever been to one of these, Ben?
I haven't. I mean, a crowdsourced conference. That sounds like quite a lot of fun.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a few rules of open space, which sounds almost an antithesis to say there's a rule to open space, but it's whoever shows up is the right group. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened. Whenever it starts, it's the right time, and when it's over, it's over. Now, talk about lack of structure, but honest to goodness, it is some of the most enriching conversations that you'll ever be in because people are there because they're very much interested in the topic. And we must have come up with 30 or 35 different topics, and we are spread around the campus of Wright University, their medical center, and there was a wonderful castle right next door where they divided us up into breakout groups. And literally you vote with your feet. If you're in a room and you think, this was a little boring, I'm not really into predictive analytics today, you vote with your feet and you get up and you walk into a room, and it might be on 3D modeling or crowdsourcing or business model innovation. So you find the topic that really generates your interest and that keeps your interest.
Wow. What a neat idea for a conference.
I'm anxious for us to try this at home. The first time I saw this a couple of years ago, frankly, I wasn't brave enough to pull this one out of the bag of tricks. I felt like we had to get a few wins under our belt, but it's a fascinating way to really keep the conversations germane to what's on people's mind.
And the authenticity as well of the speakers and those who are there engaging. Sure,
and most of the time, the Innovation Learning Network meets in the United States. We have had meetings in Canada and in England. This is our first time into the heart of Europe. But it's important to do that, to see how global innovation is, to see how people in different healthcare systems are delivering their healthcare, how they're solving problems. Like in the Netherlands, they have built a village for people with disabilities. And so it's great. It's almost like going to the Truman Show, is to look at an altogether different setup that we in North America could never imagine, at least not right now where we are as a system. Yeah. So it's good to get out of your comfort zone.
Definitely. Some great analogous learning. Well, in the spirit of tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, what are some of the key takeaways that you brought home from the conference? Maybe we'll share those up front. Those lessons will be interspersed throughout the conversation, then we'll come back at the end. So what were the 3 to 5 things that really stood out to you after attending the conference?
Well, the overarching theme was systemic innovation or innovation. By that we mean when you're trying to innovate within a large system, either a hospital-based system, an academic medical center, or a big Fortune 10 company. You are faced with different problems than the two guys, the box of Chinese food, who are sitting in the garage inventing the next great thing. So the common thread throughout the conference was systemic innovation. In fact, they had a very cute logo, a little sketchy drawing of a dodo. And the subtag was, you need to be able to outrun the dodo bird. And apparently the last place on Earth that the dodo was seen was in Holland. So that was tying all this together. There's a Trivial Pursuit question for you. So the theme was, you have to be able to outrun the dodo. So that would be, one of our first take-home points. The second would be around open space and how to use that. A third theme would be around patients being included in an innovation process. And I think many of us are getting more and more comfortable with that. So there were several patients at the conference, and one of them had one of the keynotes. And then we talked, at the end of the conference, there were representatives from different countries talking about how do we build capacity for innovation. So there's at least 3 or 4 big themes right there.
That sounds like something that, like you said, almost every large organization would love to learn more about, and sounds like it was very timely. Well, who were some of the key players, the hosts, the organizers, some of the keynote speakers? What was the starting lineup of the conference?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, for the first lineup were our leaders from the Innovation Learning Network. Innovation Learning Network is now based with Hope Lab in California. It originated out of Kaiser Permanente, but this last year has moved over to Hope Lab. So we had Margaret Laws, their president, Chris McCarthy, the executive director of the ILN, Tim Rawson, and the great staff that provide leadership to the ILN. We also had leaders from Reshape, which is the Innovation Center at Raboud. And so oh gosh, you're going to ask me to pronounce a group of Dutch names, right? Could we just simplify it like, because I can't say most of them. But they had a great leadership team from Reshape, and those two groups together co-hosted the 2.5 days. Many of the folks who were there were our typical members who come from the United States and Canada and the UK. But I think because we were also in Europe this time, we had members join us, or guests join us from Sweden, from Germany, from other countries in Europe.
Wonderful. Well, let's maybe look at some of the topics that were discussed. So could you provide a quick outline or summary of some of the conference talks or activities?
Right.
Maybe kind of a list of...
Here's a couple that really come to mind. They brought in Helen Bevins, and if you read the literature at all in the change management space, Helen is a notable thought leader. She is the Chief Transformation Officer for the National Health System in England, and has written a lot and spoken a lot, and is on YouTube a lot, so you can see her in lots of different formats, about how to do large organizational change. And she took us through models where in the past, especially in healthcare, we're such a hierarchical and siloed area. The surgeons are over here, and outpatient medicine's here, and central supply is somewhere else. Most innovation is going to require that we break down those barriers and can work across the continuum of care. And so she has really helped a lot of organizations understand how we need to get to the fabric of the organization, how we need to connect with people. So many times it's not a lack of a good idea. It's an inability to work with people. At the heart of the change process, is a person who, for all good intents and purposes, is wedded to an idea that has served them really, really well. And now you come up, like some young punk saying, we got to change, or, there's a new crisis ahead. And it's hard to connect that way. And so she really stressed that to be an effective change agent, you have to be able to move not only a group of people, but networks of people. And so most of her time and then her breakout group was spent on that. Secondly, we had a speaker who was a patient, is a patient herself, in fact, spoke from her wheelchair and spoke about a patient-facing organization that they have there in Europe. I think many of us, myself included, here I am a physician, and most of my life I spent solving problems, but without asking patients and families what they wanted. And so she brought that patient face to the platform, and then many of the breakout groups had a patient within the small group as well. The third part of our conference was the open space part, and I was able to attend several of those and came away with some good contacts, some good ideas. And we also had a showcase of about 10 startup companies who did their pitch, their show and tell, so you could come away and say, wow, I think, like in our situation, Carolinas would be a great location to do a proof of concept of that particular product. So we were able to see some of the cutting-edge innovations that are taking place. And then we had a speaker from Philips, so from a large company that is a global company. In fact, this was Jaron Taz, and Jaron knows global healthcare. He's been in the cross-continuum space. Philips has been a leader in digital health and virtual care, in predictive analytics, and so he spoke to how do they, as a big company, look at that.
Oh, well, sounds like an all-star lineup.
It was.
Group. Were there some presentations or groups that were particularly memorable, maybe of the open spaces meetings that you had? Were there some, and again, these were what people brought to the table. Were there some that really stood out to you as particularly engaging?
I'll tell you about one. I attended Chris McCarthy's open space on teen behavioral health, and this was particularly of interest because our own family has faced this over the last few years. So I went there as both a parent of a child who struggled with these issues, and then as a person who couldn't find the resources that we needed. It so happened that my teenager was traveling with me on this particular journey, and I had given her this trip and ability to travel with old mom because she was doing so well through her counseling session. And so I said, come on, Bethany, just watch how innovators attack this problem. And so she was able to join in and, in fact, became the patient included, which is one of the hashtags of this group, patients included. And as she shared some of her own experience, she watched how the folks around the circle listened intently. In fact, that night, it was great to hear her perspective. She said, Mom, most of the time when we talk about behavioral health, people are kind of like Eeyore. Oh, I don't think we can solve this. The problem's too big. And she said, everybody was upbeat, like pushing up their sleeves saying, we can take this on, or Hope Labs is interested, or in our country, we think we could do this with the problem. And she said, I've not been in a group where people were so positive about solving such a big, challenging problem. And I think that's where so many of us get energized in this field of innovation related to healthcare. On a daily basis, you can get overwhelmed by the government's not paying for it, nobody cares, there aren't enough resources, and there is such a can-do. Maybe we're even a little delusional. Maybe you could assign us a psychiatric DSM-5 code, but maybe we're on that other part of the spectrum that we believe. And, Ben, we talk about this in our own group, that the most important part of innovation is being committed to start the project, to start the conversation, to do the first bad piece of work, because somebody else will come along and go, wow, that was really bad work, Gene. I could do better at that. And then they take your first starting point and they make it better. And so personally, I hope my own teen, aspires to become an innovator, because believing that there can be a better future is just so inspiring. Yeah. And so we spent 2.5 days with wonderfully delusional people who take on big, enormous problems like organizational change in healthcare and are not intimidated by it and dust themselves off and get back up. Yeah. One of the quotes that was a guiding force for these 2.5 days was a quote from Jack Welch. And we all know, Jack Welch in his heyday at GE. But he said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And I know, Ben, you and I talk about this at work all the time because we feel like it's changing. Everything outside of us is changing so quickly. And we feel this passion and this yearning to create an awakening of the healthcare leaders that we're fortunate to work with and say, come on, we need to step it up. We need to step it up because the rate of change is so quickly out there. And yet all of us, particularly all of us at that conference, work in large organizations where sometimes we feel like paint dries faster. So here we are trying to encourage a sense of urgency in a world that for good reason has checks and balances, has a sense of need to be careful.
Democratic processes, absolutely.
Highly regulated, need and appropriate concern for patient safety, and yet we know that the world is changing quickly.
Yeah. Well, great lessons and what a moving story about your family. To me, that reveals two more principles that we often talk about as a team. The first being intentional serendipity.
Absolutely.
Which we'll probably discuss in much greater detail on another podcast episode. And another is a phrase that we use a lot is having a how can we mindset. And so that's what Bethany experienced with those innovators is, instead of having a no, we can't, mindset. It's a how can we do this? And so what an energizing experience to be with people who have that same mindset. And
there was a young man in that particular open space group who the next day came up to me and he said, yesterday's conversation was really moving for me. And he said, even as a young person myself, I struggled and couldn't find the resources that I needed. And he said, I thought yesterday was scripted. I thought perhaps you brought her on purpose and that she had her remarks all made. And he said, last night at dinner when I realized that was spontaneous, or as you would say, it was serendipitous. It was intentional serendipity. I mean, I came to that conference with intention. In fact, I paid for it myself. Our hospital system did not pay for me to go because I felt like to go to Europe, that looks luxurious and we're in a time of affordability. So I took my own daughter and my own dollars and paid for that. But I also felt like I was making an investment for our system because I knew that I would be bringing back a lot of enriched learnings that I could share. But I put intentionality into that trip. He put intentionality into going to that breakout group. The people that are leading Hope Lab have spent the last 6 months doing ethnography and patient discovery, and they have an intentionality. And when you put those folks together and kind of shake, don't stir, or whatever that phrase is, some marvelous conversations come out of it. And that's what we experienced. They weren't scripted. They weren't rigged. It was genuine. It was in the moment. Very authentic.
Very powerful.
Yes.
Terrific. Well, you mentioned some of those things that you wanted to bring back. What would be some of the tactical things that you think large organizations could begin applying today or begin planning to apply in the near future?
First of all, I think it reminded me that patients need to be included. I love that phrase that goes something like this: nothing about me without me. And I've spent 30-some years in healthcare, and most of the time, except when I was directly delivering care, it wasn't about them. I have lived in a system, gosh, this sounds cruel or harsh to say it, but it was built around how can providers provide the care rather than what is it that patients need. And the good news is that we're all awakening to that and becoming so sensitive. So that has prompted my spirit again to think about nothing about them or me without the patient in the room. I know, Ben, you and I enjoy that song from Hamilton about, being in the room.
In the room where it happens, the room where it happens.
That's right. So the patients want to be in the room. And I'm going to spare the audience my singing on that. But that's what I think about. They want to be in the room when it happens.
Yeah. And a good example of a consumer-centric organization that does something like that I think we've talked about before in other podcasts is Amazon. They'll often have a chair that they say, this is the consumer here in the room listening to our conversation. So they always have, someone, maybe not someone present at the meeting, but they designate a chair that represents, think of the consumer here in the meeting with us.
Absolutely.
It's a great example of keeping that perspective.
Right. I think the power of open space, it reminds me how we're in a knowledge economy, and everyone comes to work as a knowledge worker, or by and large, especially if you're an innovator, whether you're in healthcare or you're in some other industry. Why not tap into that? I mean, first of all, it meets the needs of the adult learner because we want to share. We've come bottled up with all these great ideas, and we're anxious to share. But why not open up and hear from each other and quickly learn who's moving faster and who's found a way to accelerate and really tap into that. So open space really captures that. The third part I would share, and probably is a take-home. I don't know so much that it's actionable, but it reminds me and grounds me. At the end of the third day, I was honored to be on a panel where we had leaders from the Swedish healthcare system, from Ontario, Canada, from the Netherlands, and then two of us from the United States. You could have used any of our words and swapped them between us. And that's humbling because you realize then it's just not my system that's slow. It's all of us. It's not just my system that has a wise set of checks and balances. We're highly regulated. We should. Theirs does too. Now, there may be some opportunities because of how different governments are structured or different laws are structured. We have a CON state. Others may not. Others may have a single payer. We could learn from that. But when it comes to innovation, we struggle in such a similar way. And so I think it's more important for us to open our eyes and ears to what's happening around the world. Just recently, it wasn't at this meeting, but just recently, I learned of a hospital in India that I can't wait to track down because they can do cardiac surgery for under $2,000 per child. Complex bypass-based cardiac surgery. And we probably can't get it under $25,000 or $50,000. I can't wait to see that reverse innovation and figure out how did they do that in a different system.
And scale it.
And scale it, right. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, maybe let's come around full circle and go back to the key takeaways that we started off at the beginning, and maybe you can embellish just a little bit more on some of those things. So let's go back to some of those things that you said at the beginning. So one was, I think, the systemic innovation.
Systemic innovation and realizing that the world around us is changing very quickly. And if we can't outrun the dodo, to use their image, then we are doomed for failure. Now, do I think huge healthcare systems in the United States are going to collapse tomorrow? No. But as you've talked about in other podcasts, disruption is outside the door. There are people that are trying to figure out how to get into this economy, this healthcare economy, how to get into their space. They're not encumbered by some of the old ways of doing things. They're not encumbered by certain rules because they are outside the system. And if we're not wise and either figure out how to partner with them, adopt them, acquire them, they will certainly outrun us.
Yeah. Another one, I believe, was just generally about open spaces. So,
open space. Create that space. You're right. I can't wait till you do the podcast on intentional serendipity because I think those two go very well together. Now, I was trained in a very conservative family where you sat at the table until you were dismissed. So this idea of voting with your feet and getting up and just walking out, just seems rude to me. But I'm learning to deal with it. I'm getting some help, and I'm learning how to face that inner child there. But that's what they want people to do in these sessions. Don't stay in a room that's not meeting your need or is not relevant to what you're working out. Vote with your feet. I think about these large movie theaters. I wish you could do that. You're sitting in there and you go, wow, seeing Star Wars is not really my thing today. I think I'll go watch a chick flick and just get up, walk out, and go to the other theater. Now, secretly, some of us probably do that, but it's not generally encouraged.
Right.
But in open space, it is.
That would be. I do hope at some point I can attend an open conference,
right,
and do that. And then the last, I think there were 3 things that really came out. I'm struggling to remember.
Is the thought about thinking globally, right, and learning from other systems and drawing out of them what you can, because our problems are so much more similar than we could ever imagine. They're very similar.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wright, for this recap.
I probably sound like I've made a commercial plug, and I'm not on retainer. I should have made a disclosure at the beginning, but I am a believer. I've seen the huge value, and I know that there are other organizations, like some of our partners at Carolinas do something similar with people who have a focus on lean and lean processes. The value that comes from walking alongside people that are in the same trenches, that understand your pain, that share in a very vulnerable, genuine, authentic way is awesome. There's just not a price tag you could put on that. So I think, I'm a believer. I'd like to see more folks join and more organizations work with us, because I think that's how we get to, better innovation faster.
Yeah. And we're excited about the next conference that ILN will be hosting, right? Can you tell us a little more about the next one?
The next Innovation Learning Network will be in Charlotte. So it'll be the weekend of May, you're going to ask me, right? 8th to 10th, something like that. So when some people listen to this, they may be listening before the event or after the event, but they can go to our hashtag. But we'll be hosting it on business model innovation, because we're big believers that no innovation is sustaining unless the business model around it changes. So whether it's looking at Netflix, it wasn't about sending DVDs in the mail, because we know Blockbuster did that as well. But it's about how the business model not only changed, but continues to change. And so a lot of us are very interested in that, particularly as we're moving from a world of volume to value. I often say, I'm full of all these isms. So one of them is you can't jump a 10-foot chasm and 2 5-foot leaps. So going from volume to value sometimes is like jumping that chasm. Sometimes you just have to flat out make the new business model and step into it, or jump into it. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. We're going to be working with some other thought leaders in that space, both industry leaders and consultant leaders, and we hope people will join us.
Yeah, our team is psyched to partner with the ILN team as well to host that conference in the spring, so we look forward to that. Well, Dr. Wright, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we look forward to having you on the podcast again very soon.
Well, thanks, Ben, and I have my gear on.
We're glad that you're a fan. Well, join us on our next series of podcast episodes coming soon to iTunes and Google Play. I won't reveal too much about the topics, but I'll say just a few words as a preview. Amazon, resources, processes, and profit formulas, Apple, jobs to be done, healthcare, and Google. Stay tuned. This is Ben Tingey. Until next time.